Episode 196 Above Ground Podcast. Gonna fly now with Lou Solano.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Will Foley and TPP, are not medical professionals, and this is not medical advice. Both Will and TPP have first-hand experience with mental illness. They have their own perspective and own thoughts on mental health challenges. Above Ground Podcast was birthed to help those who struggle with their mental health through honest dialogue. These conversations aim to break down the walls while building stronger foundations for positive mental health. By speaking openly and sharing tools, they foster connection. By fostering connection, they convey hope. With connection and hope, we can continue to increase awareness. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Coming at you live with real conversations about mental health from the peerpective. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now your hosts, TPP and Will Foley. Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast.
Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below.
Oh, you know who that is. You down with TPP? Well, it's Sunday morning, buddy. What's up, man?
Yeah, you know me.
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Mr. Author Extraordinaire with his script coming out pretty soon. His scripture.
I don't know about extraordinaire, but
it'll be there. Project.
That's right.
That's right.
You know it.
So we are back on Zoom, Timmy. So that means we must be talking to someone, right?
I believe you are correct, Will.
That's right. We have a Nippertown person. His name is Lou Solano, and Lou had a featured blog post on the 80K Sports page in July of 2022, and it's entitled "You Are Not Alone." And in that feature, he discusses his suicide attempt and the loss of his dad and the self-worth and self-love deficit that seems to weave its way into so many of us depressed individuals that attempt or live with suicidal ideation. So Lou, first I want to say thank you for choosing to stay and taking what you've done and literally running with it and making the best out of it, man.
Literally and figuratively, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. So why don't you tell everyone who you are and whatever you're comfortable with sharing, man?
Well, my name is Lou. I talk about in the article my experience starting, I'd say, around 14 years ago, but my anxiety and depression was percolating prior to that, years before that. 14 years ago, I attempted suicide. It was a scary moment for me. I got scared and I didn't fully commit to it. I walked into the hospital and I checked myself in, and I spent a weekend in the hospital. Ever since then, ever since that low point, I've been working on myself, working on my anxiety and depression. And one of the outlets that I've found is running. And it was really just more of a happenstance in terms of how I discovered running. I wanted to do something meaningful before I turned 30. And around that time was the Boston Marathon bombing. And I decided I wanted to run a marathon. And it was difficult to train for one. I don't know if you guys have ever tried it. It certainly takes dedication, personal dedication to do it. And I will tell you that I felt such a high when I crossed that finish line. I did it a month before I had turned 30. So I accomplished my goal a month before I was to turn 30. And I felt such a high crossing that. Actually, I remember turning onto the corner and I saw finish line. And up until then, I was basically running like an old person. I was basically just, little inches of feet. My legs were killing me. I saw the finish line. All those endorphins just kind of kicked in. I was running full stride and I crossed the finish line and I had such a high that I wanted to keep doing it, and it made me feel good. And ever since then, I've made running a part of my life. And in that time, I've also gotten to know people, a community of good people. And when I say good people, I mean people who are just a bright light in my life. They are people who some know about. Well, most people now most know it through the article because I've been open with them about it. But just a good special group of people that are just genuinely looking out for you and want to support you even when days are just kind of crappy. As an example, about a year ago, I was just having just a bad day and a bad week, man. It just nothing seemed to be going right. And I'm with the same running group, and we were at a track doing some workouts, and I just remember like it was a shitty day, nothing was going right. My my watch battery had died out. I remember I said to the coach, like, I'm done. Like, I'm just done. I'm done with the practice. I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna just leave. And I got some texts from folks in the running group later on saying, hey, listen, whatever's going on, we're there for you. We all get through these. Well, we get through these, but we have these bad days. We're there for you. If you need anything, just keep on. We can work with you. And I got back into it the next week. I actually had the privilege of saying that to them, articulating that specific moment to them, saying how much that meant to me for you to reach out to me and say, hey, we're here for you no matter what. We want to, we want you to we'll be there for you if you need us. These people, I'll honestly say, are such a bright light in my life, and I'm so grateful to have met them and to have been on this journey and ultimately shared this story that I have because it is personal.
Thank you so much, first of all, for just sharing all that and being willing to share it with us for your first time in this forum. True? This is the first podcast you've done, or have you done some interviews and stuff prior
No,
to
this is
this?
my actually first ever podcast.
Wow.
So
So thank you very much for allowing us to be the curators of this story, man. We take that very personally and very seriously. So it speaks volumes that we're the first people. So we truly appreciate that. I'm very grateful. You prove that the power of willingness, hope, and movement can move anybody forward in their journey and on their road and on their highway. I use the highway metaphor a lot because Tim likes to use the car and the motor and stuff, or the motorcycle as the vessel and stuff. And I'm curious to know, what have you learned? Were you an athletic person prior? Not running wise, but were you athletic at all?
yeah, I mean, I played soccer when I was a kid
Okay.
and just played pickup basketball games. I did crew in college.
Okay, so so that is a perfect thing for you because that's what we have. We have those gifts that we're given, that if we figure out that there are vehicles to our stability, it's a wonderful thing. Connection, you prove that connection and having a group of people together is a
Yeah,
really important thing.
that's what I was going to say. I noticed the support factor on it is such a huge piece that I think sometimes gets lost. Like Will said, connection it's so huge, and then to add running and the movement of the body and what that does to anxiety itself. That's just it's just a recipe for a yummy cookie.
It is. And you touched on a couple things. Talk about hope and you talk about connection. I'm a huge Marvel fan. And I don't know, have you guys ever seen the movie X-Men Days of Future Past? The basic premise is the X-Men of the future are living in a very dark future. Mutants are essentially hunted down and enslaved. There are humans who tried to help the mutants. They were also hunted down and enslaved. So the X-Men go back in time to try and change that future. There's a very poignant scene towards the middle where a young Charles Xavier, who is able to reach out to his future self. And at this point, the young Charles Xavier is a very wounded animal. He is talking to his older self, and his older self is asking him to hope again. And I mean, I love the scene so much. I I reference it a lot to people, but there's towards the end, the older Xavier's able to show the younger Xavier, his students, the people, the kids that he will touch, and the hope that he can bring to them. And sometimes I feel like we want to reach out to our younger selves and say, there's hope. There's reason to hope again. And it's that kind of connection that time travel isn't possible yet. Who knows, maybe tomorrow they come up with a time machine. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
So
I don't know, man. I'm not sure. As much as life is tough, it kind of
yeah.
makes us who we are, and I don't know if I want to go back and change anything because we know how that works out. It changes everything. So, does it change it for the better? We don't know. Or would it change it for the better? We don't know.
Well, that's true, but the point I'm trying to make with all this is we don't really have the ability to time travel and talk to our younger selves, but we do have the ability to talk to other people. And in a way, we have the ability to reach out to them and at least attempt to show them that there is hope, that you're not alone, and that even if things are down, even if, well, to borrow a quote from The Dark Knight. So there you go, Will. I've got a Batman reference for you. In the movie The Dark Knight, there's a quote: "The night is always darkest just before the dawn, and I promise you, the dawn is coming." And it's that kind of hope. It's not going to be easy. It never is, and life is never a straight line. It sometimes it takes you right back to where you started, and you hit that point maybe several times before you go off on a different path. But there is hope out there because human beings can move forward if we choose to. And we can reach out to people here and now and say, hey, I've been through this. One of the things I've got a few emails from random people about my article, and the general theme was, I understand what you went through. The analogy about anxiety and feeling like you're drowning, the analogy about depression being just this heavy weight on your mind and body. People can empathize with that. People can understand that. So the hope is that we can reach out to other people and say there is hope. It may not seem it, but trust me, there is hope out there.
It's funny that you bring up that little piece of the article because that's one thing that I remember from it was you said something like anxiety can rush back in like a tidal wave, and depression can sneak up on you and snatch you like a predator. That to me is a very well put sentence to kind of describe these feelings and these things that we are dealing with.
It is sometimes it's like a snake. It just kind of, just slithers around and you don't realize it until it's got you wrapped around. It's not for those people who may not have been dealing with this. My hope is that folks read this and take those analogies and empathize with individuals who are dealing with any type of mental illness. One of the things that I read about or heard is that millennials and generations forward are more apt to being open about mental health. They're more open to seeking out therapists or other forms of therapy. They're more open to talking about it. And I think it's wonderful that my generation and subsequent generations are more open to it. My only concern about the way it's being talked in some corners right now is that it comes off as a knock against somebody. And regardless of how you feel, somebody with dementia is suffering from, an illness. And it's not just that person, it's the family that's working through it as well. And it is just something that when it's talked about in the sense as a knock against somebody or as a pejorative or something that's, bad, then that's when the conversation turns away from what it should be, which is these are people. These are people that have to work through this stuff. And these are families that have to work through this stuff and show some empathy and show some compassion. Because if we just see it as an adjective, then it just becomes, it doesn't become a mental illness. It becomes just a knock against somebody, and it doesn't help the conversation. I think that mental illness is something we as a society should continue to talk about in a proper way, in a positive way. This person needs help. This person needs help. Let's get them help, but they're people.
Lou, you mentioned the snake a little while ago. Do you think that knowing the snake and getting yourself familiar with that snake can help with these conversations, and not only help with these conversations, but help with your further progress within?
I think it does. It certainly takes time to understand. It certainly takes time to understand it. It takes a certain degree of being able to step outside of yourself and realize, hey, I'm feeling kind of down right now, or I've been really like just showing, I've been really like depressed these last 3 weeks or whatever. It takes a certain degree. It takes time. It's something, again, for your listeners or for anyone who suffers or who, anyone out there, whether you suffer from mental illness or not, it's something that it takes time. It takes a certain degree of recognizing it. But, we can get there. We can get to that. You can get to that point where you're able to, have a support system that you may not recognize it, but they would, and they can help you in a positive way.
Recognition and the willingness to acknowledge it are really big hurdles for a lot of people, especially people with severe persistent mental illness who have been, hospitalized for many, many, many times over. And it's difficult for people to recognize that they're having a hard time, let alone having sometimes the language to discuss it. And Tim and I talk at length about language. And right here in front of me, I include this in everything. I have it on my desks and stuff, is a list of positive and negative emotions from Byron Katie's TheWork.com. And that is one of the most exhaustive lists of emotions I've ever had. And me having those lists taught me different languages. When did you and where did you develop your language for being able to discuss this? Was it in your self-education? Did you study any of this in college?
I would say it would have been in the settings of therapy. One is the therapist would recognize the language that I would use, and I would use similes and metaphors instead of exact words. And the therapist would be able to clue into that and be able to work with me on that. Some people are visual people, some people are auditory. Part of it is the therapist itself. And that's why in the article, I say, if you feel like you're not getting the results, then talk to the therapist. If you still don't get those right results, find the right therapist. The right therapist is out there. You just have to keep looking. And that's the tough part, is keep going.
Barriers are always there, and you talk about finding the right therapist. And Tim and I have much experience now with switching therapists because of all kinds of issues. And we talk about how finding the right therapist is super important, and don't ever feel as if you're stuck with one therapist. But what happens to people though if they fall into that in between time and they start to fall down? Like what is a suggestion that you can offer them when that barrier keeps coming up? Because if you really want help and that barrier already is to seeking help, you're already up against a tidal wave that, boy, you're gonna have a hard time staying on your board.
Well, that's a good question, Will. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. And not sure if you hear I don't know a lot, but it's an answer I'm not afraid to give people if they ask me.
I say it all the time, man, not to cut you off. I What
Yeah,
I've learned in my 50 years of going around this planet is that I know way less than I ever thought I knew, and there's always something to learn, man. And there's always
yeah.
something to learn about yourself too.
If there is one consistent recommendation that all of my therapists have asked me to do is to journal. And I'm not a big writer, even though I did write that article, but I am I'm a visual person. If writing doesn't work, maybe drawing. Sometimes therapists ask you to draw things, and those are your drawings, and they're done just in downtime. Just draw them and look at them, and question it. Just look at it. You don't have to feel like you come up with an answer. But I would say, if that would be a recommendation. Again, I'm not a professional, but that's one thing my therapists throughout my time have suggested, is to either write or draw.
I think journaling is probably one of the best things that one can do, whether you know whether they use it as writing for an article or whatever it is. But if you want to, if you have a goal of improving yourself or whatever goal that you have, journaling is definitely one tool that can get you to that goal. That's Will had mentioned. I have a book that is probably going to be out around the time that this comes out, and that's how that whole process started for me, was journaling. And I just would journal and journal, and that's how I would learn. Like, you both were saying I don't know the answers. Well, that's the same thing as I would stand up and admit I don't know. Like, so I would try to get these thoughts out onto paper to kind of clean up that mental clutter, and the process of doing that to try and learn and connect more dots as to why, how, so forth.
You also process in the brain a different part of the brain when you write as opposed to hearing. It's processed differently. So I actually had real time experience with this with my daughter over the summer because writing helps me too. And I she was trying to learn some lines from a play that she was in, and I told her, why don't you write out all the things that you need to learn, because her dialogue wasn't massive. So, and I said, you'll learn it better, and she did it literally. Like, and I kept trying to tell her that you process it differently in your brain when you write and see it, and it expresses differently. And you say you're not a writer, but I will say you have a natural gift and an eloquent way of describing your emotions. And you talk about metaphors. And I've learned as a paraprofessional in the mental health field that metaphors are actually one of the best ways to describe things to people because people understand those concepts. Did you do a lot of writing? You didn't do any writing? Did you do like a little bit of writing? I mean, you have to do writing in college, obviously, but I didn't know if you had.
I did, obviously the classes I took in college and high school, you had basically you wrote when you had to wrote. I did have an English teacher. She was my English teacher my freshman and senior year. And I do remember her telling me, I think it was freshman year, I had written something, and she had said something to the effect that my writing is like that of an old soul. And I thought that was a wonderful compliment. That's that's as far as I've really, in feedback that I've gotten to my writing. But
I
I'm a
got
visual again, I'm a visual person, so I'm gonna there are gonna be pictures that show up in my head, and that's how I'm gonna describe it.
That's awesome. Well, obviously you talk about comic books and you talked about like the Marvel stuff with a passion because I could see it in your eyes. So I get why you're visual. Do you notice that your creative juices start to flow more after a run? Or do you actually use running as a way to be creative?
Either, to be honest with you, creativity for me just happens. It just comes to me. This article, I had never sat down and put on paper the last 14 years until two friends of mine, one of them he's a runner, he's deaf, and another is an interpreter for him. The interpreter friend had written an article about him and his friend and my friend experience running the Boston Marathon. And it just struck me that, hey, this is something that I want to do. I want to share my story because he had written that article. I thought this would be great. I could write an article, and it was sobering at the end when I read the article that I had written, not the final draft, but I mean just what I put down on paper. It was very sobering to look back and say, wow, in 14 years, I had highs, I had lows, I false starts, stumbled, but I kept getting back up and I kept pushing forward and I kept just trying to reach that light that I saw.
Yeah.
And so I would say creativity just comes for me, but everybody's different. You talk about running, I mean, talk about walking. I do a Zoom meeting with a men's group, and we talk about our feelings and how we're doing, not just like, the typical, macho man, I'm tough guy, but also sad moments, happy moments. And I was talking to one of the guys about my article, and he said, for me, it's my outlet is making music and or writing comedy. So for anyone that reads this, running may not be for you. It's whatever you enjoy. It's whatever gets you going, and that is really, I guess, the point that I hope people realize. Hey, it'd be awesome if everyone started running. We'd all be healthy and there'd be tons of people at these 5Ks. But for some people, running isn't their cup of tea, and that's great because you know what, you like something else. Maybe
And
you
some people
enjoy,
can't run. Some people
yeah,
just, physically can't. So yeah, I agree. I think, we talked, I believe we had an episode actually, back a month or so ago, 175, where we talked about, getting help, message in a bottle. And we talked about doing, finding the activities that bring you joy and pursuing those activities. Do you have anything besides running that you kind of turn to?
in general or just for mental health.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for mental health, anything that, I guess.
This is I just sorry Timmy, I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to make this point. Everything that we do affects our mental health. There's no
Yeah, that's why.
separation.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's no separation.
that's what I was going to say. General is mental health. Everything's mental health for me. So, everything we do, everything we say to ourselves, it affects it. So,
Music, I enjoy music, listening to music, playing music. Sometimes with COVID not necessarily over, but it's not like it was, 2 years ago. Things are starting to open back up. One of the first things that I did when I could was just give somebody a hug. That was I was my friend. It's funny. My friend and we had the same birthday, different year, but same birthday, and they had invited me over to. Her and her wife had invited me over to their house for Easter, and she was the first person I ever gave a hug to this was, I don't know, this was like a year after they had shut everything down. I can't remember, but just being around people that I enjoy. Again, my friend and I, who we have the same birthday, we go to this place in the capital region that'll give you the same number of wings as your birthday. So last year we had close to 80 wings between the two of us. Luckily, we had other people to help us because there's no way like two people can seriously down 80 wings, at least not without calling an ambulance. Um, being around people, just being around people that, or talking to people, not necessarily about how you're feeling, but just about random stuff. One person that I miss every day is my dad, and he was my first best friend. And it's it was sad when he passed away, and he was someone I always enjoyed. I do not have one regrettable moment that I in in my life with him. Not one regrettable moment. That's how much of a bright light that he was and he still is in my life. And I used to just enjoy talking politics with him. We would talk about this or that, and we were sort of on the same wavelength. Not exactly. We would disagree. I actually remember when he, at his wake, he had done something for a political party, getting Hispanics to register to vote because he believed, his belief was, bring people to the table, bring these people to the table so that they have a voice. And I remember talking to one of the folks that he worked with, and she said, I could disagree with your father, but still come away his friend. And this was 2019. And I was just blown away. I was like, wow, that is just like a rarity right now. Having him in my life was a big help and a bright light. And he still is, even after even 3 years, 3.5 years that he's been gone. It's just those moments. You just make those moments. You have the ability to make those moments with special people. You have the ability to that you can't make up. You just can't make up.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of wrapping it up to the connection side of things. It's that connection as humans we all crave. And before I forget, I do want to thank Julie because she made the connection to make this happen. So thanks, Jules the Tarot Witch.
It was actually a happenstance. I
Thanks,
have a
Jules.
pinched nerve. I was dealing with a pinched nerve, and I was sitting in the waiting room, and I started talking to her, and somehow conversation had gotten to the article I had written, and then she gave me your card. And I don't believe in coincidences. The universe doesn't operate in coincidences. And so thank you, Julie, for the happenstance. Obviously, a pinched nerve is not a good way to go about meeting somebody. Anybody who has suffered from a pinched nerve, they know it's just fucking painful. But hey, something good came out of it, and I'm much better now. So
I just wanted to say you made me tear up with your story of your dad. And I saw that in the article, how close you two were, man. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
I will not underestimate the impact that he had in my life. And I believe with every fiber of my being, that with every cell in my body, that the people that love us never stop looking out for us even after they're gone. And there were so many, not just in that one anecdote with my dad, but just sometimes like I'll look up in the sky and I'll just say, thanks, Dad. That's it. Just I'll look up and I'll see him and I'll just say, thanks, Dad. I love you. And so I don't think those connections go away. And grief is for me, grief was a way to kind of really crack me open. I had been a person that was very closed off to people, closed off to myself even. And his he had cancer, and you want to talk about a person who was very strong. He fought for 3.5 years, and he was like, for 3 years he was like the Terminator. The man, you wouldn't know that he was sick unless you actually knew he was sick. I would call him up. He would do his chemo on Thursday or Friday. I'd give him the weekend to kind of relax or whatever. I'd call him up on Monday or Tuesday. Hey, Dad, how's it going? Oh, yeah. Hey, Louie, I'm out here raking the leaves or doing some or mowing the lawn, whatever. It's just, he wasn't going to let something like this affect him in a way that it wouldn't make him not him. It would make him someone he's not. And so his his illness and the grief that I suffered afterwards was, of course, it couldn't have happened. It didn't happen any other way. Obviously, I wish it would have been something completely different, something more benign. But this is the way that it had to happen. And my connection to him is it's it's always going to be there. He's always going to be this bright light. It's just now it's my turn to be that bright light for other people that he was for me.
Yeah, now it's your turn to reflect back to the world what he reflected to you. I love it. That was so eloquently put, man. See, there you go. You need to write another article.
So, Lou, we always wrap up with 3 questions. And the first question for you is, do you have a favorite or a least favorite word?
Well, I'm just disappointed that we're wrapping up. I was hoping we can go on for hours. Favorite word, I'm going to plural words. It's 2: love and hope. That's it. Love and hope.
Do you have a least favorite word?
I wouldn't say it's a least favorite word, but it's more of just people's just the way people had their inflections, the way they talk. Let me give you an example here. Don't be a pussy. I hate that phrase. Absolutely hate that phrase.
That's a great one, man. Nobody's ever said that. That's a cool one, and a phrase like that's awesome that you said that.
Yeah, I absolutely hate that. No one in my experience has ever used that in a uplifting or positive way. It's always been just in a negative, bullying. By the way, I hate bullies. Negative bullying, just beating you down kind of way. So that phrase, I hate it. Absolutely hate it.
What is on your running soundtrack?
What is on my running soundtrack? Mother Nature. I don't run with earbuds or an iPod or any music. I run when I run with groups or with a person. We just converse as much as we can. Sometimes long distances, it's difficult. When I'm on races, it's the crowds. It's the crowds. Like I talk about the crowds, the complete strangers that are cheering you on, that want to see you get to the finish line. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times where I've been running half marathons where I feel like I just want to quit. Like I've got to mile 5. I'm just going to walk off and quit. But it's just the crowd just keep it going. The impromptu bands that show up, I mean, because they're everywhere at the big races, the marathons, half marathons. I do the Utica Boilermaker. There's people with bands and they're playing music, rock music, whatever.
You
That's what gets me going. That's my soundtrack right there.
not and
Is
not
the world.
I kind of wanted to bring it back to that because that's about presence and stuff. So you're very present. I kind of had 2 questions, and I just kind of wanted to piggyback on it. Do you have obviously music is pretty important to you, and you mentioned the Rocky theme in the article, which I have a really deep connection to Rocky. Rocky was like the second movie I ever saw in the movie theater when it originally came out, and it has gotten me through a lot of dark times in my life.
So, if there was something that you could do or would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
I might have alluded to this earlier, but changing the way people talk about mental health, and I'll get somewhat political here, so bear with me. There's been a lot of talk in the last 6, 8 years about the mental health of various presidents. And my big concern is, regardless of who you support or who you're against, my concern is the way it's being talked about in the national news is in a way that it's not helping the conversation. It's becoming sort of, again, as I go back to it, a knock against somebody. And I do agree that if you're in certain positions, your mental health is important, but it's becoming sort of trivialized. And I worry about the people who actually do suffer from dementia and the families who have to work with that, because these are at the end of the day, regardless of who you're talking about, you're still talking about a human being. When you make it a knock against somebody, it doesn't help the conversation.
Well, you having conversation and you writing what you wrote and us having these conversations helps flip that on its, actually helps knock that on its ass. Because that's, that, like, I scream it loud and proud every day, man. I wear it on my sleeve. It's tattooed on me. It's a part of me. It's a part of us. It's what we do. And ain't nobody gonna tell me about anything that they're gonna shove their opinion down my throat, because it just adds to more of the same shit, and that's why you just gotta pull yourself away. And eloquently said, and your words. Please go read the article. I'm going to embed the article link in the show notes, and you'll be able to find it. You can go to adksports.com. It's on the July 2022 running page. Lou, it's been a pleasure meeting you, man.
Well, I just wanted to take a moment to dedicate this, not just this podcast, this conversation to a group of people in my life. You know who you are. You are a wonderful group of people. You're just the best thing that's happened to me in my life thus far. And so this whole podcast I want to dedicate to each of you. So thank you.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Timmy, what another amazing conversation, man. We're so lucky to have people be able to come on and share and be willing to share what they share, man.
That's right. Let's talk mental health, man. Spread
Absolutely. It. Everyone has mental health, man. Everyone, regardless of whether you pay attention to it or not. So until next time, get well.
Be safe.
Stay above.
Thank you for giving us a listen. New episodes every Wednesday. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can share, rate, review, and even subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Other ways to support the show: follow us on social media, share the content, share our episodes. You can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/abovegroundpod. For further concerns, show ideas, or just to say hi, you can email us at abovegroundpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for listening and supporting mental health. Keep the conversation going and stay above.